Hey listeners, how are you all? Thank you so much for being our awesome members. There's a lot to come more. Sit tight, be comfy, put your headphones, now let's begin. There was one thing Naruto Uzumaki had always wanted, a family. Not a team or a mission or someone calling him a hero. No, he longed for a mom who'd swipe imaginary dirt from his face with a thumb and spit. A dad who'd ruffle his hair and say, "Good job, son." Maybe even an older brother who'd let him tag along, or a little sibling to look out for. But that was all wishful thinking. What Naruto had instead were the village shinobi. They were masked visitors who checked in once a week at his tiny apartment. They came to inspect, to judge, to report. They'd peer into cupboards and tell him he had dusty floors. They made sure he was eating and still breathing. Most times he only knew they'd been there because there was an extra cup of ramen on the table, or a new pair of socks folded on his bed. Sometimes a note scolded him about chores. If Naruto happened to catch one in the act, the ninja would say nothing. Just stare, like being near him was a punishment. If he tried to talk, they vanished even faster. What he hadn't realized back then was that they weren't just dropping by. They were watching, all the time. He figured it out after growing tired of the whispers, the stares, the cold shoulders. Crying about it had done nothing. Yelling even less. The villagers still looked through him. Talked around him when they thought he wasn't listening. Glared like he'd stolen something from them. He tried running away more than once, but the ninja always dragged him back. Not that he had anywhere to go. The only kids who let him hang around were older boys who let him tag along once or twice a month. Not really friends. They were more like reluctant big brothers. But Naruto learned more from them than anywhere else. The group had 4 boys. Mendo was their ringleader, a sharp-eyed brunette with more swagger than caution. He liked Naruto but wouldn't let him join officially. It was too much attention, too many grown-ups asking questions. Still, Mendo passed on the important stuff. "Don't take crap from anyone," he'd say. "They've got nothing to do with you. Make sure they know it." Naruto clung to every word. But what worked for Mendo didn't always work for him. Things changed after Naruto got shoved around by a shopkeeper for trying to buy candy, with his own money, no less. When Mendo saw the bruises, he stopped giving advice and started giving lessons. Twice a week, Mendo would sneak out to teach Naruto the basics of street fighting. Kutomi, another of the crew, sometimes helped. He was lean and quick, with a shinobi for a father. Kutomi didn't want to follow in his dad's footsteps. But the training stuck. With Mendo's scrappy instincts and Kutomi's taijutsu tips, Naruto learned the art of unpredictability. When the other two, Teiko and Shinzo, found out about the side sessions, they insisted on contributing too. Teiko, tall and wiry, came from the same orphanage as Naruto. A pickpocket with a lockpick collection and a philosophy, skills should be passed down. "You're my legacy now." Shinzo, wild-haired and forever grinning, was the prankster. "Us blondes have to stick together," he declared before schooling Naruto in booby traps and sleight of hand. By 7, Naruto could break into a house, plant a stink bomb, and vanish without a trace. But all the fun came with consequences. The older boys got in more trouble than usual. Naruto made a decision. He'd go solo until things cooled off. The group still welcomed him, but he kept his distance and focused his efforts on a new mission: make the villagers eat their words, one prank at a time. His first solo strike didn't go as planned. Naruto balanced on stacked crates, aiming to rig a bucket of river mud above a doorway. Classic setup. But just as he reached to steady the trap, it was gone. Poof. A few feet away stood a ninja holding the bucket. Same navy uniform, same pocketed vest, same unreadable mask. "You can't do that," the ninja said flatly. Naruto blinked, thrown off for only a second. "Says who? I pulled this on Takana last month. I scared him so bad he dropped his cabbage." "What, he hire a bodyguard now?" No reply. Just a disappearing ninja and a very frustrated 7-year-old. The next day, Naruto tried again. Different prank. Different time. Different ninja shutting him down. He got clever. He was earlier hours, or tried new locations. And still, he was intercepted every time. Even skipping class didn't help. It was undeniable now. He was being followed. He started looking for them. There were flashes of green and blue behind corners, the wish of a vest disappearing over a rooftop. His gut said they were always there. Fine. If they wanted to tail Naruto Uzumaki, he'd give them a run for their money. The first time he ditched them, it was a quick turn through a busy market. He draped a ratty blanket over his blonde hair and slipped into the crowd. He saw one of the ninja scanning rooftops from above, looking the wrong way. Naruto slipped back the way he came and splat, finally got Sumasu with that bucket of mud. Didn't work a second time. Or the time after that. So it became a game. How many times could he outsmart them? How many pranks could he pull before they caught on? School was boring, but this was purpose. The ninjas got better at hiding. In just a week, Naruto couldn't spot them at all. Still, he could feel their eyes on him. Whenever that strange sensation crept in and he attempted a prank, someone appeared to stop it. If he felt nothing, he got away clean. It didn't take long to figure out the pattern. Eventually, he discovered why they had become so hard to find. They weren't wearing uniforms anymore. They didn't even have forehead protectors. It was strange, though. He couldn't seem to remember their faces. They definitely weren't wearing masks, yet each one vanished from his memory like smoke. So Naruto started studying the villagers more carefully. Some people seemed oddly aware, even while pretending to read the newspaper or browsing vegetables. Others moved too smoothly, almost like they were gliding. He tested his suspicions a few times. Sure enough, the people who stopped him watched the ones he had picked out earlier. That made things exciting. Each time he thought he had it figured out, the ninja watchers changed their routine. He began watching the trainees at the academy instead of pulling pranks. But the teachers didn't like him hanging around, so he learned to hide in bushes. Even then, if he got too close, they always seemed to notice. Maybe they could sense him watching them, the same way he could feel when he was being watched. Either way, he needed to observe the students so he could guess what moves the ninja watchers might make next. He figured that to beat a ninja, he would have to become one. Through a lot of trial and error, Naruto figured out how close he could get before the teachers noticed him. He learned how they jumped between rooftops. He saw how bouncing off walls at sharp angles made turns faster. With each new trick, he got better at dodging his watchers and staying hidden. But the ninjas weren't finished adapting. When they began following him in pairs, things got harder. No matter what he tried, he couldn't get away. Skipping school only made the teachers more irritated. After a full week of constant surveillance, Naruto decided watching from afar wasn't enough anymore. He had never tried sneaking away at night. That seemed like the perfect time to test a new idea. He waited until he was sure no one would check on him. Then stuffed his bed with extra clothes to make it look like he was still sleeping. He slipped through the bathroom window, which was just big enough to fit through. In another year or two, he might not have been so lucky. Wearing dark clothes and using the stealth Teiko had taught him, Naruto reached the academy without any trouble. He found a window on the second floor, and once inside, he explored the building until he discovered the library. Teiko's old lockpick set was missing a few tools, which is why he gave it to Naruto, but it was still enough to open the door. Most of the scrolls were about boring topics like history, tactics, or dry military theory. Then he found a section on chakra, and that changed everything. Some scrolls mentioned how higher-level ninja could sense chakra and even hide their own. They didn't explain how, only that it was something elite ninja could do. It was called a high Chunin level skill. Naruto didn't know what that really meant, but he understood enough. If he wanted to ditch the ninja watchers, he'd need to learn how to do it. He read every scroll and book he could find on chakra in 3 days. It wasn't a large section. One book expla. In the 12 hand signs used to control chakra and shape it into jutsus. He memorized every one. During the hour he pretended to sleep at night, he practiced those signs under the covers, adding one at a time until he knew them all. The only jutsus listed were the basics, Bushin, Kawamari, and Henge. Kawamari was a substitution technique. It let a ninja switch places with a nearby object to escape. It seemed useful, but the first time he tried it, the academy teachers would know he was using ninjutsu. Given how they already treated him, Naruto didn't want to find out how they'd react. Bushin created an illusion clone. It could fool someone, but the clone couldn't go far, and the scroll said distance depended on the user's strength and skill. Naruto wasn't confident he had enough of either. Henge was different. With Henge, he could transform into another person. All it took was holding a clear mental image. Naruto realized he didn't even need to copy someone real. He could invent someone brand new. Someone no one would ever suspect of being Naruto Uzumaki. He found a training spot in the woods and got to work. The book said chakra capacity increased through practice and physical conditioning. So he built a routine. Lots of push-ups, sit-ups, punching, kicking, and the simple kata that Kutomi had shown him. After that, he practiced Henge deep into the night. During the day, he focused on learning how to hide his chakra. He already knew how to feel it. That part wasn't hard. He just had to close his eyes and focus. His chakra always felt a little different. Brighter somehow. The chakra from others seemed quieter, more muted. Naruto figured that was normal. After all, shouldn't a person feel their own chakra more strongly than someone else's? When he ran from the ninja watchers after school, he used every trick he had. If he got enough distance, he'd stop and hide, then try something new. Most of the time, they found him right away. He figured they could sense his chakra. If his trick worked, they would walk right past him. If not, they'd catch him like always. Once Naruto figured out that the feeling of being watched was actually him sensing chakra, he started focusing on it more carefully. Before long, he could sense his watchers a few blocks away instead of only when they were close by. But with this skill came an unexpected side effect. He started sensing everyone else too. At first it was confusing. It felt like the entire village was crowded around him. Then he noticed the difference. The villagers' presence felt soft and hazy, like curling up near a sleepy cat in a patch of sun. But the ninja watchers were sharp and vivid, more like a cat hissing with its back arched. That distinction helped. After about a week, he found it useful. He could tell who was a disguised ninja and who was a regular person. Even empty houses felt different. He could walk by and sense whether anyone was inside without needing to look. Suppressing his own chakra, though, that was much harder. He tried everything he could think of. He'd gather his chakra and imagine himself vanishing. Sometimes he pictured it like mist, drifting away until there was nothing left to notice. Nothing worked. Every time he failed, he acted as if he thought he had gotten away. Sometimes he'd stroll the village for fun before trying again or pulling a prank. Every attempt ended the same way. He was caught. Weeks passed. He hadn't pulled off a single successful henge, and his frustration began to wear him down. Sneaking into the academy library had been more than a month ago. And all he had gained was a better sense of who was around him. He could now sleep in class and still absorb the key parts of a lesson, but that didn't feel like enough. He was about to quit when something finally worked. By forcing all his chakra into a small ball in his stomach and squeezing it tighter and tighter, his watchers walked past without noticing him. It made his head che and his stomach twist for hours afterward, but it was a breakthrough. After repeating it a few dozen times, the headaches faded. The stomachache, while still uncomfortable, was easier to ignore. It felt like something small and wild was bouncing around inside him, scratching and scrambling to get out. But it worked. That week, Naruto made up for lost time with a wave of new pranks. Encouraged by that success, he refocused on henge. At first, he thought it would be simple. The first step was forming a hand seal and pushing chakra around the outside of his body. That part only took about a week to get right. The rest was trickier. The scroll had said to mold that chakra into the image you had in your mind. But Naruto couldn't remember exactly how. Rather than go back to the academy, he decided to experiment on his own. After thinking about chakra suppression, he wondered if he had memorized the jutsu wrong. Instead of surrounding his skin, he began gathering chakra just underneath it. His earlier attempts had been like forcing on a costume. Now he tried pulling his body into the chakra, letting it reshape him from within instead of just layering on top. The first time it worked, he nearly collapsed from the pain. His entire body burned, but it was still better than failure. So he kept trying. A week later, something finally clicked. One moment he was crouched in the woods, pushing and pulling his chakra into shape, and the next he blacked out. When he woke and looked at his reflection in a puddle, he froze. A tall, blonde woman stared back at him with big blue eyes and long pigtails. His shirt felt tight and his sleeves were too short. He could barely breathe, but he had done it. He had really done it. Naruto had used henge. Every part of him wanted to jump up, shout and run through the streets bragging to everyone. But then he remembered the watchers. This was supposed to be a secret. He grinned, imagining one of the ninja approaching him and politely asking, "Excuse me, miss. Have you seen a young boy about this tall, with spiky blonde hair?" That would be perfect. Still, passing out from every attempt wasn't a good plan. He needed more control. He needed to figure out how to fix little details, like the whisker marks on his cheeks. He had pictured his face without them, but they had stayed. Worse, the henge hurt. His entire body felt like it had run 10 races and then fallen down a hill. His skin prickled like it was full of tiny needles. He tried to return to normal and realized with a jolt that he couldn't. His chakra didn't feel shaped anymore. This wasn't an illusion. It felt real. He tried to do the jutsu again, planning to transform back, but it didn't work the same way. Instead of pushing his chakra out, he had to pull it back in, drawing himself inward. It didn't work. Each time he tried, the henge remained. He sensed ninja pass by more than once. Even if they weren't looking for him, it only added to his rising panic. He was supposed to be in class. Even when he skipped school, he always showed up in the morning. It let everyone know he was still around. The longer he stayed hidden, the more likely it was someone would go check on him. If they went into his apartment and found his bed stuffed with clothes, it'd be over. He'd probably have to stop practicing at night for a long while. As evening came, his fear didn't fade. In fact, it got worse. He sat curled up in the dirt, too afraid to move. A quiet part of him began to wonder if he'd be stuck like this forever. He thought about shouting for help. Maybe a ninja would hear him. Maybe one would help. But every time they had talked to him in the past, it was to stop him from doing something or to tell him to leave. So he said nothing. That night, Naruto fell asleep afraid he might always be a girl. When he woke up, his body felt a little stronger. His muscles ached less. His skin didn't burn quite as badly. With a deep sigh, he tried again. This time, he got close. He kept trying to reverse the process, pulling his chakra inward the same way he had pushed it outward the first time. But each attempt only resulted in suppression. He was almost there. Almost. Naruto's breakthrough came when he was tired. Too tired to fight it anymore. He gathered his chakra quietly beneath his skin and sat with it. He didn't try to shape it or suppress it. He just watched. Something shifted. The chakra began to move without his prompting. Not wild or chaotic. It was more like a slow swirl, tugging at his skin, cooling in his stomach, then gently flowing outward again. It reminded him of water sloshing in a bowl, settling with each breath. It was strange, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. It didn't feel like control. It felt like cooperation. Then came the pain. His muscles burned, his stomach turned, but he clenched his teeth, shut his eyes, and didn't resist. The chakra was doing something. He didn't want to get in its way. When it settled, he opened his eyes. The world had gotten bigger. Or rather, he had gotten smaller. He leaned over the stream beside him and stared at his reflection. A little kid with spiky blonde hair and bright blue eyes blinked back. He was himself again. If he had any energy left, he would have jumped for joy. Instead, his body felt as heavy and his legs barely worked. All he wanted was his bed. Forget the ninjas. He just needed to sleep. He stumbled toward his apartment, barely able to lift his feet. Near the edge of the forest, he bumped into something and toppled backward. When he looked up, there was a man standing above him dressed in black with a green vest. Naruto stared up at him, blinking slowly, and tried to remember what that meant. A ninja. That was important. But why? His thoughts faded as exhaustion pulled him under. Naruto woke in a white room that smelled faintly sharp and clean. Something was stuck in his arm, a needle, and he yanked it out, flinching at the tiny trickle of blood that followed. He pressed his hand to the spot and sat up. His knees wobbled. He reached out to steady himself. After a moment, his legs held still long enough to test a few steps. That was when he noticed the breeze. He was wearing a strange kind of dress that tied in the back and left part of him exposed. It was uncomfortable and weird. He looked around the room for his real clothes. There were 3 doors. One had a window that looked into a hallway. Another was cracked open, revealing a bathroom. The last one looked like a closet. Inside were his clothes, folded on a shelf. They were still dirty and had holes in them, but he didn't care. He pulled off the hospital gown and got dressed, feeling better the moment he had real clothes on. After using the bathroom, Naruto returned to the room and froze. An old man was sitting beside the bed, dressed in red and white robes with a wide hat that bore the symbol for fire. His face was lined and kind, with strange markings beneath each eye. Naruto stared. He didn't need long to recognize him. The Hokage. Panic rose in his chest. If the Hokage was here, it meant trouble. They must have found out he was learning ninjutsu. He wasn't supposed to be training. No one wanted him to be a ninja. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the kid nobody wanted around. He took a shaky breath, preparing to explain, when the old man smiled and spoke. "I see you're awake and up. You gave us quite a scare." Naruto stood stiffly, uncertain what to say. "Come, sit down. You're not in trouble if that's what you're thinking. I just want to know what happened. First you vanish for 2 days, and then you collapse when a ninja finally finds you near the forest. You've been asleep for another 2 days since then." Naruto's stomach dropped. If the Hokage found out the truth, he'd never be allowed to become a ninja. Thoughts spun wildly as he climbed back onto the bed and looked at the Hokage, bracing for a lecture. But the old man was still smiling. "Oh, don't look so grim. Naruto, I've known you to sneak off sometimes, but never for this long. I was worried. The world's a dangerous place, especially for a boy on his own. That's why I have ninja watching out for you." Naruto tried to take in what he was hearing. "So, you're not mad?" "Heavens no. You've had a difficult life. It's not surprising that you'd find your own way. The real surprise was how thoroughly you fooled the Chunin on duty. They didn't notice anything was wrong until you failed to show up in the morning. A bundle of old clothes under the blanket was enough to trick them." "Quite impressive." Naruto blinked. "You were worried about me. Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" The Hokage paused, watching him closely. "Do you know what it means to be Hokage?" Naruto tilted his head. "You're the leader of the village because you're the strongest ninja." The old man chuckled. "That's what most people say. But there's more to it than strength. A Hokage. He must care for every person in the village. He must protect them and look after them." Naruto blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "All of them. It's not easy," the Hokage said gently. "But you learn to look past people's faults and find the good in them. Everyone in the village has value. You just have to see it. Like the ninja saying goes, look underneath the underneath." Naruto frowned. "But what about all the mean people?" The Hokage's face became more serious. "I'm not happy about how they've treated you, Naruto. You're just a boy with a good heart. They're not bad people, though. They've made bad choices, that's all." Naruto thought about that. He'd seen villagers act cheerful when they didn't think he was around. They laughed, talked kindly, and seemed like good people. That was why he wanted them to notice him. He just wished they were kind to him too, or at least didn't glare or send him away. The Hokage glanced over with a thoughtful expression. "Do you know the story of the 4th Hokage?" "What?" Naruto blinked. "Wasn't he the one who died defeating the demon fox?" "Something like that." "Do you know why he was chosen as Hokage?" Naruto shook his head. The old man nodded and continued. "A lot of people wanted the title. It was never a contest, but I was growing older, and though I hadn't announced it, everyone expected me to choose a successor soon. I watched many ninjas try to prove themselves. They boasted about their missions, challenged anyone they could, and constantly showed off their skills. But they were chasing recognition, not responsibility. None of them would have made a good Hokage." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "There were only 2 I believed had true potential. One was a quiet man. Very strong, very smart. He wanted to learn every jutsu in existence. He didn't show off like the others because he didn't need to. Everyone knew what he could do, and no one dared challenge him. The second was a younger man. He was cheerful and full of energy. He liked games and spent time with children from the village. He had strength, yes, and a sharp mind, but his goal was to protect others, not impress them. Veer showed off unless there was real danger. That second man was Minato. I chose him because he didn't seek power for himself. He only wanted enough strength to keep the village safe. When the Nine Tails attacked, many lives were lost. But Minato found a way to stop it, even though it meant he wouldn't survive. He didn't want to die. He had more he wanted to do. But he gave everything he had for the people he loved. That's why he was Hokage. The old man fell quiet. His eyes drifted toward the window, lost in memory. Naruto sat still, trying to understand it all. He fidgeted, shifting in place. He wasn't sure what the story was supposed to mean. Maybe the Hokage had forgotten he was there. He considered slipping away. Naruto. The boy jumped. Why yes. Did anything happen to you while you were gone? He thought Naruto had run away again. He hadn't. But he couldn't tell the Hokage about training either. Not yet. Even if the old man said he cared, Naruto didn't want him getting mad. That would hurt worse than anything. Naruto shook his head. Then why were you so tired? I've never seen you sleep that long. Naruto shrugged. I was just tired. I didn't sleep much while I was out. And I wanted to get home and go to bed. But I ran into that ninja and couldn't get back up after. It wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Hopefully, that was enough. The Hokage studied him for a moment. Then nodded. I see. Well, you're dressed, so let's head home. He stood and offered his hand. Naruto hesitated before reaching out. The Hokage wrapped his fingers around the boy's hand, giving a soft tug to help him off the bed. Together, they walked down the hallway. Naruto didn't speak. He couldn't. His thoughts were spinning. How many times had he seen parents walk with their kids, holding their hands so they wouldn't wander off? How many times had he wished someone would do that for him? Now the Hokage was holding his hand. Maybe not like a dad, he was way too old for that, but maybe like a grandpa. That felt close enough. The Hokage walked him all the way home. The villagers still looked at him the same way, but their stares didn't feel quite as heavy without the whispers. Naruto wished the Hokage could walk beside him every day. At the apartment, Naruto unlocked the door and let the Hokage inside. He gave the nicer chair to the old man and took the wobbly one for himself. His place wasn't anything special. Just a table, 2 folding chairs, a faded couch, and a crooked bookshelf. He was grateful the bedroom door was closed. His floor was probably a mess. And if the ninja had checked his bed, they'd know about the clothes stuffed beneath the blanket. The silence stretched. Naruto didn't know what the Hokage wanted. But the longer he stayed, the more nervous Naruto became. If he noticed the signs of training, everything could fall apart. You go to First Elementary, right? Naruto nodded. How do you like it? Naruto frowned. It wasn't great. The teachers didn't like him. He always got the worst projects and was called lazy or slow. The other kids avoided him. If someone was late to class, that was who sat next to him. If he tried sitting next to someone on purpose, they'd move as soon as they noticed. Everyone treated him like a freak. The lessons weren't much better. They spent 2 weeks learning multiplication with 2s and 3s. Naruto had understood it the first day. If he was supposedly the worst in class and even he got it, then didn't that mean everyone else was bored too? And his new teacher was especially grouchy. Sleeping through class had been one of his best ideas. She could yell all she wanted. Naruto had mastered the art of ignoring it. Of course, Tia, I smoothed this final section with care. To preserve your original tone and Naruto's earnest voice, refined the flow, removed harsh language, and softened punctuation for consistency with the rest of your story. Here's the revised version. I see. Naruto looked up, puzzled. He hadn't said anything yet, but the Hokage was watching him with a quiet, sad expression. From inside his robes, the old man drew out a pipe and took a few slow puffs before speaking again. Naruto. Have you ever thought about attending the Ninja Academy? Naruto stiffened. Did he know? His stomach churned as he shook his head. Sure, he wanted to be a ninja. But the academy, they'd never let him in. Not even through the front doors. Would you like to go? Of course. He didn't even have to think about it. It's already a few months into the school year, the Hokage said. But I can pull a few strings to get you in. How would you feel about starting soon? Really? Naruto shot to his feet, thrilled. Yes. He clapped both hands over his mouth a moment too late. Realizing what he'd said, and in front of the Hokage, he braced for a scolding. But the old man only chuckled and took another puff from his pipe. Then it's settled. Today is Saturday. You'll have Sunday off and start at the academy on Monday. You're a little younger than most who transfer, they usually wait until they're 9, but we've made exceptions before. I'm sure we can arrange something. He stood, stepped toward Naruto, and ruffled the boy's hair gently. At the door, he paused and looked back. Take care of yourself, Naruto. And remember, there are people who care about you and worry when you disappear. The Hokage's words stayed with Naruto after he left, but the boy couldn't think of anyone else who looked at him with anything but contempt. He remembered the orphanage. Kogoro-san always looked like she wanted him gone. He'd learned quickly to avoid her between meals. During meals, he ate fast so she couldn't scold him or give him chores. The other kids learned, too. They learned to stay away. Kogoro-san was friendly until someone played with Naruto. Then they'd get the same harsh treatment he did. It hurt most during mealtime. Everyone sat in silence while Naruto was there. Then the moment he left the room, chatter filled the halls. He used to wish he was like the other kids. That someone would tuck him in, tell him things would be okay when he cried. Or hug him when he scraped his knee. When he was 5, he ran away. Slept under benches, behind buildings or anywhere that felt safe. Then a ninja found him and brought him to his new home. They showed him the apartment, the food shelf, and explained that someone would check on him once a week. If he wanted to stay, he'd have to keep the place clean and do his chores. He did. He never wanted to go back. Cooking for himself wasn't a problem. Kogoro-san used to assign him to the kitchen as punishment. He'd handled hot pans and sharp knives from the start. He had burns and cuts, but they healed fast. Compared to that, cooking alone was easy. At least no one shouted or startled him. The food was mostly ramen, thanks to the ninjas, but he got used to it. There were so many different flavors. He didn't mind after a while. That was the only thing that got better. The loneliness stayed. More adults gave him the same cold look Kogoro-san had. They said awful things. If he tried to play in the park, someone always dragged the other kids away. Sometimes the kids didn't even know the adult, but they left anyway. He'd end up alone in the sandbox. School had started around the time he left the orphanage. It wasn't fun, but it gave him something to do. School lasted year-round except for July. Sundays were off, and Saturdays were half-days. He wasn't usually bored unless it was a weekend or holiday. Those were the worst. Families gathered together while he was stuck on his own. The only people who talked to him were the ones who said cruel things. He cried a lot, ran away sometimes, but he always came back. Where else would he go? That had been his life for a year until he met Mendo and his gang. Things had improved since then. And now, finally, he was going to the Ninja Academy. He'd be turning 9 this year, just like the other students. If he were like everyone else, he would have had to wait another year. But he didn't care. He would prove to everyone that he could be a great ninja. That night, he dreamed of the 4th Hokage laughing and playing with a group of children. When Yondaime spotted Naruto standing off to the side, he walked over and invited him to join. It was the best dream he could remember having. The academy teachers have arrived, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi looked up from his desk, nodded to Teona, and signed the final line on a fund. Ing request for wall repairs in the northern sector. Rising slowly, he made his way toward the conference room, already considering how best to handle what came next. The academy teachers weren't going to like the decision. Asking them to watch over Naruto while continuing to teach was a lot, especially given his recent escape. But the boy needed stability. For years, the Chunin assigned to Mon. Naruto had never failed to locate him within hours. This last attempt was different. If the child couldn't find something to root himself in, some sense of purpose, Sarutobi feared the village would lose him for good. At least in the academy, the teachers could be given orders. If they refused, they could be replaced. Elementary school teachers could only be paid and politely requested to behave professionally. Here, the Hokage held authority. "Welcome, Hokage-sama," came the greeting in unison as he entered the room. He motioned for the dozen teachers to remain seated, then walked slowly to the front. His eyes scanned the group. Would they be able to put aside their feelings and treat Naruto fairly? "I imagine you're wondering why you've been called here without warning," Sarutobi began. "Your efforts with the current students have been commendable. But I'm assigning you one more." Confusion flickered across their faces, though none spoke. Trained shinobi knew better. This isn't a typical situation. The academic year is well underway, and the student in question is younger than most beginners, only 8. He won't be eligible for genin rank until 12, same as the others. This transfer is for safety reasons. I expect you to teach him the equivalent of his elementary education so he doesn't fall behind. Curiosity now mingled with concern. Sarutobi drew a quiet breath before giving them the name. "You all know of him in some form. I expect professionalism. Set aside emotion. He is beginning his 3rd year, with basic reading, writing, and early arithmetic. I want you to build on that so he's prepared to advance with his cohort. Is that clear?" Nods followed, though Sarutobi knew the real question was still coming. It was Yamato who asked, carefully, "May we ask who this student is?" "Naruto Uzumaki." The air changed instantly. Anger, disbelief, and resentment rippled through the room like a wave. Sarutobi remained calm. His disappointment simmered just beneath the surface. They couldn't see what this boy had endured. No family, no friends, no kindness. Just fear and hatred for reasons he couldn't begin to understand. "There must be some mistake," said Taimono, his voice cutting through the low murmurs. "That child, he carries the demon. He can't be allowed to learn the ninja arts." "Enough." Sarutobi's voice, though aged, held weight. The room fell silent. "Are you truly shinobi? Then act like it." Several teachers looked away, uncomfortable with their own reactions. "I said Naruto will be trained as a ninja. He is not the fox. He is a boy who lives alone, carries a burden he doesn't understand, and receives none of the compassion a child should. If you can't treat him kindly, then treat him fairly. That is the expectation, in the classroom and beyond." He paused, letting the words settle. "I will assign a chunin to escort him Monday morning. You may choose where he sits and how you structure his lessons. But if I learn of any mistreatment, you will answer to me. Consequences will be severe, depending on the offense." His gaze met every pair of eyes in the room. One by one, they looked away. Sarutobi nodded once. "Submit your teaching plan to Taiona's desk before you leave." Without another word, he left them behind. He knew Naruto would still face cold stares and whispered judgments. But inside the academy, at least Sarutobi could enforce a measure of control. And with ninja training underway, the boy might one day learn how to defend himself. Not just with jutsu, but with strength of spirit. Something told him Naruto would need both. Iruka Yumino sat among his fellow instructors, the same stunned expression mirrored on every face around him. Naruto Uzumaki. That name alone brought a storm of emotion. The boy carried the burden of the 9 tails. The same force that had destroyed so many lives. Iruka had always sworn to protect Konoha and follow the Hokage's orders without question. "But this, what are we going to do?" asked Ruto Yamato. He was the one who usually found the words first. Iruka watched the older man sigh and push a few stray strands of hair behind his ear. "We can't defy the Hokage," Ruto said. "Naruto Uzumaki is to be accepted as a student." The room stirred uneasily. "But how can we? That boy, surely there's—" "Stop," Ruto snapped, before the murmurs escalated. "The decision has been made. The only question now is how we're going to handle it." He let out another tired breath. "I'm not thrilled about it either, but we have a responsibility. Whatever history that boy carries, he's still a child. If we're going to follow the Hokage's order professionally, we must stop referring to him by what he contains." Ruto had always been the steady voice among the academy's chunin instructors. Uruka had looked up to him since he started teaching 4 years ago. If anyone were ready for Junin, it was Ruto. I won't teach him, said Goju Taimono, eyes narrowed with challenge. Neither will I. Not in my classroom. I won't do it either. The refusals came quickly. Uruka sat silently, too stunned to add his voice. You're not just disagreeing with me, Ruto said. Fury beneath his calm tone. You're refusing the Hokage. He ordered us to allow the boy into the academy, Goju argued. He said we could decide how. Let him sit in back with busywork while the real students learn. That's all I'm saying. I'm not taking him in. Uruka felt the logic of it. But something about it didn't sit right. Ruto scanned the room. Does everyone else agree? One by one, the instructors nodded. Voices muttered their approval. Ruto sighed. Very well. I'll take Uzumaki into my class. Uruka winced on his behalf. Ruto taught ninja 3rd year. The most demanding class in the academy. Ninja 1st year was mostly physical training. Laps, push-ups, basic taijutsu, weapons practice. History lessons helped students recover from the physical strain. Ninja 2nd year required students to train on their own. They built strength and agility while studying disguise, trap identification, ninja sayings, and chakra theory. Camping skills wrapped up the year. 3rd year, though, that was tough. Early months focused on theory, stealth, ambush strategies, gathering intel. Students stayed in the classroom except for sparring and throwing drills. After winter break, things shifted to field work in the village, survival trips, and trap training in the forest. By spring, they were preparing for the genin exams. Adding an extra student, especially one like Naruto, would stretch Ruto thin. Uruka thought about how much easier it would be for someone like himself, teaching 1st years. The class structure had more flexibility. Before he realized it, he was speaking. I can take him. When you need support. The room turned to him in surprise. Even Ruto paused, blinking at him. Everyone knew Uruka had lost his entire family during the Nine Tails attack. His pain ran deeper than most. Ruto's smile was soft. Thank you, Uruka. I appreciate that. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll develop his curriculum. He rest of you focus on maintaining a respectful tone and ensuring your students treat Uzumaki-san with basic decency. Uruka rose slowly, still wondering what he had just committed to. Saturday and Sunday felt like the longest days ever. Naruto was too excited about starting at the Ninja Academy to sit still. After the Hokage left, even pranking didn't sound fun. Not really. He wandered aimlessly for an hour. Then slipped away from his ninja watcher. Only one shadow this time. Strange. Had they changed their system? 2 pranks later, he was deep in the woods, stretching and training. Risky, sure, but he figured he was already enrolled. How much trouble could he really get into now? He kept his senses sharp, ready to detect anyone nearby. All he wanted was more practice with Henge. He swore to himself that this time, he wouldn't faint. The first time had to be a fluke. He gathered his chakra, pushed it outward, and braced for the pain. It came quickly, sharp and blinding, like knives all over his body. Then something inside him snapped. The transformation hit. His eyes stayed shut. He couldn't move yet. The stabbing faded, but now his skin felt stretched and tight. Any movement triggered another flare of pain. He stood there, frozen, waiting for it to pass. Minutes ticked by, or maybe it was only seconds. Before he could move again, he stumbled to the edge of the stream and looked down. The same blonde woman stared back. He'd transformed. Still, the whisker-like scars were there. Naruto took a deep breath and tried to shift back. Nothing happened. He didn't panic. Not yet. He focused again. Tried letting his mind wander. Ramen flavors danced through his thoughts. Which one would he eat when he got home? What jutsu would he learn next? Still nothing. His nerves were spiking, but he kept calm and tried another approach. He gathered his chakra and let it sit, quiet and untouched, as he thought about who he was, not what he looked like. Blue eyes, spiky blonde hair, a grin that didn't care what anyone thought. A stubborn heart, that unshakable drive to prove them all wrong. The whisker-like scars that wouldn't fade, no matter what. The way he couldn't sit still in class and how he preferred running wild through the village instead of staying indoors. With each thought, the chakra began to move. It pulled into his stomach. The pain returned, sharp and sudden, but Naruto didn't fight it. He waited. When it passed, he looked down again. His reflection was his own. He kept practicing. Each time, the pain eased a little. Eventually, the ache started settling in his muscles, stiffening with strain. He stopped and ran through stretches to loosen up, then began his usual routine. By nightfall, he was able to jog home instead of limping back. He took a roundabout path to avoid being seen near the woods. Just in case. Cooking miso ramen took 3 whole minutes, but it felt like forever. After eating, he collapsed into bed. Sunday came, and Naruto ditched his watcher again. He set up a couple of pranks with long delays, just for fun, then headed out to train in a different spot. Not much changed. The pain still hit hard, but he could now shift into his female form and back without losing control. Almost instantly, before sunset, he returned home. The last 2 hours were spent doing laundry and chores. He didn't want to give anyone a reason to complain. Tomorrow, he'd be a student at the Ninja Academy. Monday arrived, and Naruto was up with the sun. He showered, ate breakfast, brushed his teeth, and ran a comb through his spiky hair. By 7 o'clock, he was standing outside his apartment, waiting for the escort the Hokage had promised. He knew where the academy was. He'd passed by it plenty of times. But he didn't want to go without permission. Besides, he had no clue where he was supposed to go once he got there. So he waited, and waited, and waited some more. He figured he was early, but by 9 o'clock, he was fidgeting. School started at 8. If no one came by 9:30, he was going without them. It wasn't going to be his fault if he was late on the first day. The ninja finally showed up a little after 9. Naruto wasted no time. He told him off for being late, demanded to know what kind of ninja was sloppy enough to delay an escort, and complained about how important first impressions were. The ninja said nothing. Naruto expected that. It still felt better to yell. They started walking, and Naruto was forced to follow behind at a slow pace. It took 20 minutes to reach the academy. Naruto knew he could have made it in 5, tops, if he used the rooftops. His watchers knew that too. He must be trying to make me late on purpose, Naruto thought bitterly. By the time they reached the front gate, he had run out of complaints. He kept his head down and began to mumble under his breath. He'd learned that if he slouched, shuffled his feet, and muttered nonsense, most people assumed he wasn't paying attention. It made it easier to listen in or watch people without drawing suspicion. The yard outside the academy was bustling. A group of students, probably around 9, were jogging along the perimeter in a neat line. The kid at the back was struggling but keeping pace. Naruto noticed the leader glancing at a nearby teacher every few steps. They weren't allowed to run faster than the slowest person. That was a rule. The instructor had a faint smile on his lips. He looked proud of his students. Then his gaze shifted and settled on Naruto. That faint smile vanished instantly. The change was subtle, but Naruto had grown good at reading the difference between casual glances and cold ones. There was a weight to certain looks. A sharp edge. He could sense them, even when his back was turned. By the time they stepped inside the building, Naruto felt that edge settle between his shoulders like a warning. Maybe Ninja Academy wasn't going to be any better than First's Elementary. He didn't like that thought. They walked down the main hall and climbed a staircase to the second floor. The ninja stopped in front of the second door on the right. A deep, calm voice was speaking inside. It stopped when the door opened. Naruto tried to peer around his escort's legs to see who was talking. "Your student, Yamato-sensei," the escort said. Then, without ceremony, the ninja stepped aside and nudged Naruto forward into the room. He stumbled, recovered, and took a good look at his new classmates. Everyone was older than him. A year or two, at least. Around Mendo's age. A third-year class, no doubt. The stares hit him like darts. The kids in elementary school had treated him like a freak. He was someone to whisper about and avoid. These kids were different. Their eyes weren't just wary. They were angry. What did I do? Is it because I'm late? Stupid ninja. Ah, Naruto Uzumaki, correct, said a man at the front of the classroom. Naruto turned his attention to the teacher. He wore dark blue and a green vest that Naruto recognized instantly. That was the standard gear for ninja watchers. He knew exactly what kind of man this was. His voice, which had sounded gentle before, now carried a harder edge. Naruto nodded without speaking. He didn't even breathe, afraid the teacher might kick him out on sight. Please take a seat in the back corner. I'll finish the current lecture first. Then explain what you're expected to do. He pointed to a spot next to a boy with brown hair pulled back in a short ponytail. The boy didn't look happy about the arrangement. But he didn't seem dangerous either. Naruto made his way over and sat down quietly. Yamato-sensei resumed his lecture. While the instructor spoke, Naruto looked around. The classroom was tiered, with 3 rows of desks arranged like steps. Each desk had 3 chairs. The teacher's desk sat at the lowest level, cluttered with books and papers. The windows were on the far side of the room, opposite from Naruto's seat. He turned his attention to the boy beside him, who was scribbling notes. A thin book sat nearby, labeled Ninja Sayings. Curious, Naruto leaned over and flipped through a few pages. A ninja must look underneath the underneath. The true ninja art is trickery, to fool the opponent. A ninja must always hide their emotions and never show their tears. Naruto blinked. It all sounded serious and boring. The boy noticed him reading and shot a glare in his direction. Naruto grinned and closed the book apologetically. Naruto tried his best to focus on the lecture Yamato-sensei was giving. Diagrams were sketched across the chalkboard. There were layouts of trees and terrain. The teacher was explaining different ambush tactics used by shinobi. About half an hour later, Yamato handed out worksheets. Each one described a scenario, and the students were supposed to write out how they'd set a trap for incoming ninja. As the students began working, Yamato walked up the stairs toward Naruto and gave a small wave, motioning for him to follow. I'm stepping outside with our new student, he told the class. I expect everyone to stay on task while I'm gone. Naruto trailed behind him, unsure of what was happening. The classroom had been full of glares, and Yamato didn't seem much different from the teachers he'd had before. Why was he placed in a class with kids older than him? Wasn't Ruto-sensei supposed to be the one guiding him? They turned down the hall and entered a separate room with a circle of desks. Yamato led them down the steps, choosing a seat and gesturing for Naruto to take one across from him. The teacher didn't say anything at first. He just stared at Naruto, whose eyes were glued to his hands. The boy tried not to fidget, but it wasn't easy. There was tension in Yamato's gaze. Some frustration, maybe even anger. Not all of it felt aimed at him. That was a new kind of look. You've just started your 3rd year of elementary, right? Naruto glanced up and nodded. Then we've got a bit of a challenge. Yamato's voice was calm, but measured. Most incoming academy students have finished 4th year. They're expected to read and write well. And know their basic math, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. They also have a working knowledge of the Fire Country's history, which helps set the stage for shinobi training. From what I understand, you're still learning multiplication and just starting division. Is that accurate? Naruto nodded again, unsure where this conversation was headed. You're in my class because there isn't a younger level academy cohort right now. But I can't teach a full 3rd year curriculum and give you constant attention at the same time. You'll be learning independently for most subjects. And doing separate exercises when we're out in the practice yard. Does that make sense? Naruto frowned slightly, but nodded again. He wanted to learn to be a ninja, but it seemed like he needed to catch up first. That was fine. He could do that. He wasn't the fastest student, but maybe if he worked hard, he could learn faster. I've put together a work packet for you, Yamato continued. Each day, while the others train on advanced techniques, you'll work through your own assignments. In the yard, they'll be practicing sparring and weapon drills, but you'll start with laps, push-ups, and sit-ups, like a 1st year student would have. Got it. Naruto gave a firm nod this time. Yamato handed him a thick folder filled with worksheets. The first pages included short history stories and questions at the end. The math started with basic multiplication and division. Further into the stack, the stories got longer, the font smaller, and the math became more complex. Naruto squinted at a few of the instructions. They were a little tricky, but they made sense. He thought maybe he could finish most of the packet by the end of the day, if he didn't fall asleep during class. Homework had never been high on his list, but if this was the path to ninja training, he wasn't going to waste time. He nodded again and looked at Yamato expectantly. If you'd joined the academy at the normal time, Yamato said, you would have spent a full day learning what it means to be a ninja trainee. How our system works and what's expected of you. You'll get that lesson in a few years. But I'll give you a brief version now. Naruto leaned in, listening closely. At the academy, you're considered a ninja in training. First year is about building physical strength and endurance, along with shinobi history that isn't taught in regular schools. Second year helps you apply those skills, disguise, traps, chakra awareness, and how to think tactically. Third year is about real-world readiness, stealth, survival, information gathering, setting traps, spotting ambushes. Naruto's eyes sparkled with interest. It sounded amazing. He wanted to learn it all. When your third year is complete, Yamato continued, you'll take an exam to qualify for the genin rank. Genin are the lowest level ninjas, but they're still official shinobi. From there, you're placed on a 3-pers. On team led by a Junin, the highest rank in active field duty. Between those two ranks is Chunin, which is where your academy teachers currently stand. He hesitated like he wanted to add something, but instead gave a slight nod. Do you understand? Naruto nodded. With that, Yamato stood and headed back toward the classroom. Naruto followed quietly. As they stepped through the door, Naruto the students had clearly been chatting while the teacher was gone. But the moment Yamato returned, they were silent again. That alone made them different from the kids at First Elementary. His old classmates could never manage that. Naruto returned to his seat and set the folder on his desk. He pulled off his backpack for the first time that morning and opened it. He'd packed light, unsure what he'd need. It was just a few pencils and a thin notebook. He opened the folder and got to work. The assignments weren't hard, not yet. And Naruto didn't bother listening to the rest of the lecture. He had his own mission now. The message was clear: until he finished what Yamato had given him, he wouldn't be part of the main class. Wouldn't get to learn how to be a ninja. That was fine. He would finish it. All of it. It had been a week since Naruto Uzumaki started at the Ninja Academy, and every time Ruto entered the staff room, heads turned. There was no need to ask. Every glance carried the same question. Iruka Yumino had a clear view of Ruto's class from his own practice yard. He'd seen the blonde boy running laps while the other students practiced kunai drills. Occasionally, a kunai strayed in Naruto's direction. They were training weapons, blunted, but Iruka had caught himself noticing when one found its mark. He hadn't cheered, hadn't smiled. But he'd noticed. Ruto never said much when asked about the boy. It went fine, he would say. Nothing unusual. And for days, that had been the routine. But today, Ruto looked different. He entered without greeting anyone, dropped into his seat, and nodded silently at the voices welcoming him. His eyes were distant as he pulled a green folder from a stack of papers and began marking it with a red pencil. Most of THE instructors returned to their own grading, but Iruka kept watching. From 2 seats away, he noted the rhythm of Ruto's hand. It was quick at first, then slowing. The older Chunin shook his head occasionally, muttering softly under his breath. Iruka couldn't make out the words. When he reached the final page, Ruto paused, staring at it longer than seemed necessary. He set the folder aside and began marking the lined paper essays. An assignment on ambush strategies, judging by the titles. Iruka, with a ninja second-year class, usually had the largest stack of papers to grade. That day was no exception. The other instructors from his cohort had already packed up and left, but Iruka lingered, watching as Ruto shifted his attention back to the green folder with a look more thoughtful than before. 10 minutes passed. Ruto didn't move. Iruka's curiosity got the better of him. He stood, walked over quietly, and leaned in for a closer look. The page Ruto was staring at was a long division worksheet. It was something Iruka recognized from late third-year elementary curriculum. Since when does basic math get that fascinating? Iruka asked. Ruto jumped in surprise. It was rare to catch him unaware. He blinked, then let out a long breath. Iruka, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Didn't see you there. Sorry. Got caught up in my thoughts. No apology needed, Iruka replied. I just finished grading my trap identification papers and saw you were still here. That's not like you. Usually you're the first one out the door. Ruto waved the explanation off. Nothing serious. Just a puzzle I wanted to solve before heading home. He gestured at the papers spread out before him. Tell me, what do you think of this? Iruka picked up the packet, flipping through Pag. S of math problems and short history passages with questions. The handwriting was clearly a child's. It had large, uneven numbers and slightly crooked letters. Looks like third-year elementary level to me. What's the mystery? Ruto ignored the question and asked a different one. When do kids typically learn this kind of math? Iruka glanced at the page again. Late third year. Just before tea. Hey, start word problems and get ready for fourth. Exactly. Ruto pulled one of the worksheets from near the back of the stack and held it out. Now, if a student from late third year were working on this, what would look different about their answers? Iruka frowned at the worksheet, clearly confused. He looked closer, trying to recall how long division was typically taught. I guess I'd expect to see each step written out. You know, like the multiplied number below the dividend, followed by the subtraction. He pointed to the top of the page. Like here, 52,752 divided by 42. Most third-year students would write down 42 under the 52, subtract it, and show the 10 before bringing down the next digit. But this, it just shows the 10. No working. Is that what caught your eye? Ruto nodded. Exactly. And he doesn't use a calculator either. Iruka tilted his head. 9-year-olds entering the academy could do it that way, maybe. Mid-fourth year elementary, for sure. But what are you getting at? Ruto looked at him, voice even. Who started in my class last week? And what grade was he in? Iruka blinked. You mean, Naruto Uzumaki? I do. Iruka stared, waiting. Ruto continued calmly. I reached out to his old teacher over the weekend. She said he missed a lot of last year's lessons. Sleeps through most of this year. Lowest scores in the class. Based on that, I expected him to be slow. Maybe disruptive. He gestured to the papers in front of him. So I gave him busy work, stuff I figured would take weeks to finish. I even drafted a few punishments that wouldn't cause trouble with the Hokage. But he handed this in at the end of the week. Fully completed. And he didn't fall asleep once. Ruto ran a hand through his hair, clearly unsettled. I thought he'd get bored and start causing trouble. When he gave me the packet, I assumed he'd filled in a few answers and guessed the rest. But he's correct on 95% of it. The ones he missed are just a few digits off. I can see exactly where he slipped. He glanced over at Iruka. On the first day, I told him to only work on the packet during class. He promised. So when he handed it in, I asked if he had worked on it at home. He looked me dead in the eye and swore he hadn't. He was pretty vocal about it, too. Might have been lying, but it didn't feel that way. Iruka leaned against the desk, silent. It was hard to know what to say. If this were any other student, he'd be asking all kinds of questions. He would be trying to figure out how far their potential went. Was this natural talent, something learned elsewhere, a fluke, or something repeatable? Was it just math? Or did it extend to history, taijutsu, shuriken technique? How strong was his endurance? His speed? His adaptability? Gifted students were rare. When they appeared, teachers usually scrambled to support them. But this was Naruto, the boy who carried the 9 tails. Could someone like that solve math problems so precisely? Or was this proof of something darker? Something that cast doubt on everything the Hokage believed. I don't know what to do next, Ruto admitted. If he picks this up so quickly, I'll need to increase the difficulty. Word problems. Ninja-style calculations. More advanced history too. But I don't want him to be bored when he enters first year officially. He hesitated, then added, I get the feeling he's been difficult at the elementary level because he's bored. Not because he's trying to cause problems. He leaned back and sighed. Last week, during outdoor drills, I gave him the Saint Andard first year routine, 10 laps and 25 push-ups and sit-ups. Not in the front yard either. It was the backyard. Twice as big. Iruka raised his eyebrows. He finished halfway through kunai drills, Ruto said. Said I looked busy, so he ran the whole set again. Voluntarily. Most kids would have just waited out the rest of the session, assuming they even finished the first set. I didn't expect him to last 2 laps. Let alone the entire routine. He shook his head again. Later, during sparring, I told him to sit and watch. He didn't nap. Didn't look around for distractions. He sat through the entire hour. Watching every move. No daydreaming. Just, focused. Iruka didn't speak for a long moment. That wasn't the story he'd expected. Iruka's jaw tensed as he listened to Ruto. It was like the older Chunin had forgotten. Forgotten what the Nine Tails really was. Forgotten the destruction. Forgotten the lives it took. Ruto was speaking calmly about the boy who carried that monster's chakra. As if Naruto were just another student. The kid's not what I expected, Ruto said thoughtfully. If he keeps working at this pace, I might talk to the Hokage about letting him enroll properly next year. He's picking things up fast, but I don't want him getting too far ahead. I'll need to hold off on kunai and taijutsu training, at least for now. Iruka couldn't take it anymore. Wait, Ruto, you're saying you want the Nine Tails to enter the academy early? Ruto blinked, suddenly aware of Iruka's reaction. Most of the teachers didn't even want him here, Iruka pressed. And now you're telling me he's ready to skip ahead like he's some honor student. Just last week, Ruto had been firm but cautious. Now he sounded almost supportive. Did the demon have hypnotizing powers they didn't know about? Ruto paused and placed a hand on his younger companion's arm. No one else wanted him in their class, so I accepted it. Now that he's in my charge, I'm going to make sure that I do my job right. He isn't the demon fox. The Hokage is right. Ruto stood and shuffled things around on the desk. This boy, Ruto continued, has no anger in him. No hatred. He SMI. Less even when others look at him like he's something to be feared. I've tested him, challenged him, made him train alone. But he shows up. He works hard. He pays attention. And he hasn't lashed out, not once. Ruto looked him in the eye. I remember what the Nine Tails chakra felt like. I was there. I know what it is. I've been watching him carefully. I don't sense it, Iruka. Not a trace. Iruka said nothing. All we have here is a child, Ruto added. One without a home. You understand that, don't you? Iruka didn't respond as Ruto gave him a small nod and picked up the folder. Think about it, Iruka, and try getting to know Naruto. You won't find a demon there. Yondaime must have sealed him too deep to be seen. If he didn't have those scars on his cheeks, you'd never know him from another child except for his ability to pick things up quickly. And I'll find out just how far that ability can go. Ruto patted his colleague on the back and left Iruka alone in the staff room. Iruka sat alone. No, this wasn't right. Ruto was one of the sharpest instructors in the academy. The demon fox was thousands of years old, the most powerful demon lord in the underworld. How could a newborn child hold such a creature at bay? Maybe the thought of Ruto being hypnotized hadn't been a simple flight of fancy. It was the only answer Iruka could think of that would explain this total turnaround. If someone like Ruto could be convinced, could be fooled, then Naruto was dangerous. He was manipulating people. Iruka leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. There was no doubt now. The Ninetales had done something to Ruto. Iruka Umino was going to prove it. The Ninja Academy was going better than Naruto had expected. The boy who sat next to him, Hattori Yurt, turned out to be pretty decent. He introduced himself the second day before class and even let Naruto flip through some of his books during lunch. Most of it was over Naruto's head, but a few sections made sense. Hattori liked giving him tips. Ways to get ahead so he'd be ready when he officially started as a first year. Physical training had been a surprise. Naruto had been assigned laps and basic exercises while the older students practiced kunai tosses. They weren't even halfway through when Naruto finished his routine, so he decided to start over. He'd barely begun his second round when a blunted kunai flew his way. It hurt when it smashed against his arm. He grabbed it from where it stuck in the ground after hitting him. He threw it back and glared when it barely sailed halfway. The older kid smirked. A few more kunai followed before he finished his laps. Each time, he tried to toss one back, but they never reached their mark. By the second day, he started dodging them. He watched the older DS and when one motioned towards him he realized they were tossing a kunai. He braced for the throw and stepped aside when he could. He still couldn't throw worth anything, though. Hattori gave him pointers after class, showing him the grip and angle for proper aim. That night, Naruto snuck into the tool shed and borrowed a few kunai for practice. By the end of the week, getting pelted during laps became routine. Most students sent a kunai his way at least once. Sometimes he dodged, sometimes he didn't, but now, when he threw one back, it reached its target. Not always with precision, but it landed. He still needed to work on aim, but it was becoming a game more than anything else. The classroom started to ease up. The glares faded. Naruto figured being everyone's personal target was useful. It gave them a way to take out their frustration and be done with it instead of hating him for the rest of the year for who knew what. The packet Yamato-sensei had given him had been rough at first, especially when new topics came up. But Naruto pushed through, finishing by the end of the week. He wanted to work on it at home, thought about cheating just a little to get it done faster, but he'd made a promise. Mendo had a saying for moments like this: never promise anything you don't plan to keep. Naruto repeated it to himself and stuck to it. Mendo said a man wasn't worth anything if his word couldn't be trusted. Instead of homework, he dodged his watchers in the evenings, played a prank to misdirect them, and trained in secret. During class sparring he took mental notes, jutsu stances, footwork, combos. He tried them out later in the woods. He also kept practicing henge, which was coming along better now. Still painful, still slow, but better. Over the weekend, he met up with Mendo and the gang to celebrate his start at the academy. They grabbed some ice cream to share in a familiar back alley. Teiko pulled him aside and warned him about a few students to watch out for, names Naruto made sure to remember. He hadn't seen the group in a while, and it felt good to laugh again. Sunday was solid. Monday, he entered school with a grin and greeted Hattori with a loud, cheerful, morning. Hattori just waved wearily and kept his head on the desk. Looks like someone didn't sleep much, Naruto muttered, smirking as he dropped his bag. Before he could sit, Yamato-sensei arrived and called him up to the desk. Only a handful of students were in the room, but the teacher still kept his voice low. I graded your packet, he said. You got a 95% accuracy score. That's excellent work. Your math comprehension is ahead of most kids your age. Naruto took the green folder automatically, blinking in surprise. No one had ever complimented his schoolwork before. You handled the history readings well, though the answers were right in front of you. This week I'm giving you a proper history textbook. I'll test you on it Friday. No book allowed. You're allowed to read it at home. Naruto nodded, still wrapping his head around the compliment. I'm also giving you a new math packet, Yamato continued. It's different from last week. You'll read a RT paragraph and use the information to solve a question. The first half involves basic operations. You'll choose between multiplication, division, addition, or subtraction. The second half uses combinations of those. Some questions may have two parts. And remember, show your work, even if it's just adding 2 plus 2. I need to see the steps. Naruto nodded again after a moment of thought. It sounded a bit tricky, but he'd probably understand it once he got started. He wouldn't know for sure until he tried it. He thanked Yamato-sensei and walked back to his seat with the old green folder, a history book, and a thinner blue folder for his next assignment. Class began without issue. Naruto opened the new packet and started on the first problem. There are 4 apples on the table. 3 are eaten. How many apples are left on the table? He scoffed. That's it. Yamato-sensei made this sound hard. He breezed through the early pages, barely thinking. The real challenge didn't begin until multiplication and division came into play. There are 24 pieces of candy and 4 friends. If they shared equally, how many pieces does each friend get? Naruto stared at the worksheet. It took a moment, but he figured it out. Just divide. That was easy. After that, the rest of the questions rolled by like nothing. Before he knew it, Hattori was nudging him and telling him it was time for physical training. When the class returned, Naruto opened his history text. It was boring. After class, he groaned about it to Hattori, who just laughed and told him to start taking notes. Quote, "Write down the stuff you think the teacher will ask," he said. "That way, you only have to remember your own notes, not the whole book." Naruto wasn't thrilled by that advice. But he hated the idea of reading it twice even more. Once was enough. Hattori headed off, and Naruto slowly packed up. He didn't take his usual sprint home. Instead, he walked, debating whether to dive back into history or start training instead. He hadn't even finished the first of 10 chapters, and the test was coming up fast. Naruto Uzumaki, correct. The voice pulled him out of his thoughts. Standing nearby was a Chunin with a navy blue uniform and green vest. Naruto had been at the academy long enough to recognize that navy blue was Chunin and black would be Junin. This one had dark brown hair gathered a spiky ponytail and a scar across his nose. His brown eyes weren't filled with hatred. Naruto had seen enough of that to recognize it instantly. Something in his gaze made the blonde's stomach twist. It wasn't hate, but it was sharp. "I'm Iruka Yumino. I teach one of the ninja second-year classes," the man said. Naruto nodded, staying polite. "I heard you've been at the academy for a week. Just wanted to check in. See how you're doing. It's pretty rare to have a student your age here, especially one working independently." Naruto hesitated. No one asked questions like that. Even his own academy teacher, the best teacher he ever had, never asked how he was doing. People weren't nice like that. Not unless they were up to something. The only person who'd ever asked how he was, without a hidden motive, was the Hokage. Still, he didn't want a teacher at the academy mad at him. It's sometimes tough, but mostly I'm not too bored. Yamato-sensei seems okay," he said, grinning and scratching the back of his head. It wasn't the best answer, but he didn't want to say anything wrong. Iruka nodded. "I see." Then came the look. It wasn't the usual anger or disgust, but it still made Naruto's spine crawl. Something about it made the blonde's hair stand on end. "You know your class will be going on extensive field trips in a few months, right? For survival and genin prep." Naruto blinked. He hadn't heard that. "No," he said quickly. "Well," Iruka said, "when they do, I've volunteered to supervise you. So the rest of the class isn't disrupted. I thought I might introduce myself to you." Naruto frowned, biting back his frustration. He was trying. He was working hard. He had a few months. He'd ace that history test. He'd be ready. Still, it was oddly considerate for Iruka to seek him out. If only that cold, sharp feeling in his eyes would fade, Naruto might have felt grateful. Iruka seemed to notice his discomfort. He offered a polite farewell and said they'd talk later. Naruto bowed quickly, thanked him, and ran home. Tonight, training could wait. History came first. He'd sneak out after dinner to practice taijutsu and kunai drills, but right now, he had a book to beat. Iruka made a point of greeting Fox Carrier at least once a day. He didn't enjoy it. That sharp edge of resentment hadn't dulled. But if he needed to befriend the brat to uncover what he had done to Naruto, then that was what he'd do. At first, Naruto squirmed anytime Iruka approached. It was obvious he was nervous, wary, and uncertain. It took a full month before the boy stopped reacting like he was bracing for a scolding. Another week passed before Iruka invited him out on a Saturday half-day. Iruka chose Ichiraku ramen mostly for practical reasons. It was close to the academy, the food came out fast. As a Chunin, no one would deny him service, even if they usually gave Naruto a cold shoulder. He'd planned to grab a few bowls and take them to the park, somewhere neutral. Somewhere quieter. Instead, the owners, Tsuki and his daughter Ayame, welcomed Naruto with surprising didn't hesitate. No sidelong glances. No second guesses. Iruka glanced at Naruto, half wondering if they mistook the boy for someone else just because he was with a shinobi. Or maybe they simply didn't recognize him. Tsuki gestured to the counter, offered the Fox Carrier a seat without hesitation, and the blonde's eyes lit up. "This is my first time eating inside a restaurant," he'd said, practically bouncing onto the stool. Iruka blinked, realizing just how strange that was. He didn't comment. What he did notice was the appetite. One bowl turned into 2. Then 4. Then 9. Iruka hadn't planned for a full meal marathon, but if ramen earned the demon's trust, then maybe it was worth the dent in his wallet. But he learned not to take the blonde out unless the kid was paying for his own food. After that day, something shifted. Naruto started opening up. Whenever Iruka asked how things were going, the boy answered with stories, school, training, the kunai games with his classmates, ideas for better traps, complaints about history textbooks, and a lot about pranks. And always, requests for Ichiraku. Iruka listened, patiently, observing. But despite all his attention, he couldn't find a single sign of jutsu, hypnosis, or manipulation. It was frustrating. Worse, Ruto seemed more taken with the boy than ever. He rarely spoke to other instructors, but with Iruka, he opened up. All Ruto wanted to talk about lately was Naruto Uzumaki. Iruka kept his responses calm, polite, encouraging, even, but every compliment about Naruto made his resolve tighten. If the Nine Tails had done something to Ruto, it had buried that trick deep. And Iruka was determined to dig it up. Luckily, November had arrived. With it, the ninja third-year survival trips were happening. Each week, a different class spent time camping, learning how to navigate and survive in the wilderness. Iruka was hoping that by having Naruto in his class he would find out what had happened to Ruto. Whatever the boy had done, Iruka would be ready. First, though, he had to find Ruto to ask when his class was scheduled for their first outing. Some teachers left early in the week. Others waited for classroom review days before heading out. Iruka finally tracked him down at a training hall, one of Ruto's usual Sunday haunts. "There you are," Iruka called, jogging over. "I've been looking for you." Ruto turned, sword in hand, and paused his movements. "Iruka, what's up?" He sheathed the blade and stepped to the side bench, wiping sweat from his face. Iruka followed, his questions already forming. "Nothing much," Iruka said lightly. "Just realized the survival trips start next week in W. Anted to check when Naruto will be in my care. Does your class head out Monday or Tuesday? Also, does he have assigned work I should keep an eye on, or do I need to prepare something?" His tone was polite, neutral. No need for Ruto to know he'd been waiting for this. "Oh, I forgot to let you know," Ruto said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Thanks for offering to take him. Especially considering." Iruka didn't respond to the implication. Ruto coughed and continued, now sounding slightly uncomfortable. "I meant to say, I do appreciate the offer, but Naruto will be going with the class this week, and next week. For the trap-laying exercises. I'm undecided about the stealth and ambush segments. Stealth might be fine. Ambush. I'm not sure he's quite ready." Iruka blinked. That wasn't what he expected. "You're bringing him on both trips?" Ruto nodded. "He's earned it. He's handled everything I've given him so far. I thought the dry history books would slow him down, but he just keeps reading faster. His average score across assignments is 93%. He got an 88 last week on a ninja second-year math sheet, the projectile angles and calculations." Iruka glanced away briefly as Ruto continued. "And the kunai drills during laps. You remember. Even after I told the class to stop, they keep doing it like it's some kind of challenge." Naruto doesn't get upset. He just shrugs it off. First, he could barely dodge. Now he's catching throws, and sending them back, without even stopping. He's still only 9, but that's something. Ruto paused, then added. "You've seen the kind of pranks he pulls. The traps are detailed, complex. All I've had to do is shift the intent from paint and confetti to real mechanics. He's adapting fast. And he's quiet, careful. I think he'll handle the stealth exercises without trouble." Iruka exhaled slowly. "I thought you didn't want him getting too far ahead." "I still don't," Ruto admitted. "But I've never given him proper instruction in throwing weapons. And he's already on par with some of my second years. He's caught up to his current classmates in history, and I may have to start him on advanced math before long. If the survival trips go well, I'll talk to the Hokage. Basic taijutsu, ninjutsu theory, and information gathering would all be done. He could pass third level." Iruka hesitated. Students who passed before age 11 were rare. Those who did had the backing of elite clans and years of training. Naruto wasn't one of them. Even if his mind kept up, his body shouldn't be ready. It took time to build endurance, strength, chakra control. Quietly, Iruka said, "That's a lot to take on. Especially for someone without a background." Ruto caught the hesitation and gave Iruka a steady look. "You still think this is about what he carries?" Iruka didn't answer. "I thought you'd come around," Ruto said. "You've been speaking to him regularly. You've even taken him to lunch." Iruka nodded once. "Still, what happens if the other teachers don't accept it? Or if the villagers notice how quickly he's advancing?" Ruto frowned, and for the first time, Iruka felt a glimmer of hope. The older teacher's anger seemed to waver, his gaze drifting inward as thoughtful silence settled between them. Iruka held his breath, wondering if his words had finally landed. If Ruto might see the danger, might recognize the risk. The silence stretched, and Iruka's chest lightened. Then Ruto spoke. "Thank you for pointing that out, Iruka. I hadn't considered how it might look to the others. I'll still take Naruto with the class. But I'll think carefully about our options before speaking to the Hokage." Iruka's hope dropped like a stone. That wasn't what he meant. He stayed quiet, watching as Ruto picked up his towel and started for the exit, lost in thought once again. And as the door closed behind him, Iruka felt the problem settling deeper. Even though he'd finally voiced some of his concerns, he still couldn't shake the feeling that things were getting worse. This had been the hardest, most frustrating school year of Naruto's life. It was also the most fun he'd ever had. His classmates still didn't talk to him much, except for Hattori Yurt, but at least they didn't seem to hate him. And kunai and shuriken practice had become the best part of his day. His aim had improved quickly. After learning how to catch kunai, he moved on to mastering shuriken techniques when they introduced those in October. Dodging flying weapons with spins and flips had been a blast, and even after he figured out how to catch them, his classmates started throwing at trickier angles, sometimes when his back was turned. The history texts were miserable, but Naruto had been determined to join the class on survival trips. Whatever time Yamato-sensei gave to complete reading assignments, Naruto cut it in half and still scored around 90% on the tests. It came at the cost of his henge practice, but that could wait. For now, he focused on keeping his taijutsu and throwing skills sharp. The math problems were starting to make his head hurt, but he pushed through. And it had all been worth it. He got to go on the week-long survival trip. Yamato-sensei even bought his supplies when the shopkeepers refused to sell to him. Naruto finally owned a real set of kunai and shuriken, not the blunted ones he'd borrowed before. During the trip, he learned to hunt small animals using only his ninja tools and set simple traps for quail and rabbits. Hattori was his partner most of the time, though he occasionally worked with others. He made sure no one got left behind. They had a few tense run-ins, like a wolf in the trees, and a cougar near the ridge, but he followed directions from whoever was his partner and they got out safely each time. The following week focused on trap making. They trained in wooded terrain, setting up more complex structures. To Naruto's surprise, he already knew more trap styles than most of his classmates. He just had to swap out his usual prank supplies for ninja tools. Kunai replaced color bombs, logs replaced mud buckets. Easy. On Thursday and Friday, EAMS of 3 defended colored flags at hidden campsites while also attempting to capture enemy flags. Naruto, Hattori, and a girl named Mitsune passed the test. Naruto's trap perimeter locked down their sight tightly, and Hattori stayed behind for defense. He and Mitsune went out and claimed another flag together. Their plan was simple. Naruto would scout traps while Mitsune handled any opponents. Unfortunately, they ran into Shokuma, one of the top taijutsu fighters in the class. Mitsune held her own, but it was clear she was starting to lose. Naruto stepped in. Shokuma hadn't expected Naruto to know how to fight and definitely wasn't ready for 2 opponents. Naruto's fighting style was unpredictable. It was street scrapping woven with taijutsu fundamentals. It wasn't refined. He never had a professional lesson in his life. But it was fast and awkward and impossible to read. His size only made it harder to counter. Together, he and Mitsune dropped Shokuma quickly. After returning with the flag, Mitsune grilled him on how he knew taijutsu. Hattori laughed, and Naruto had to challenge him to a match to prove his skills. The rest of the weekend became a sparring gauntlet with both teammates, trading blows and tips. Yamato-sensei spoke to them afterward, asking about Naruto's fighting ability. Much to the blonde's shock, he offered private evening lessons once December began. First, though, they had to finish the stealth and ambush practical. Luckily, Naruto still had the same team. For the ambush portion, they had 4 days. Then they'd switch roles and defend. Those G ambushed had a scroll they were supposed to get back to the main campsite that Yamato-sensei had set up. The first 2 days they were supposed to make camp and defend from defense attacks. They had second 2 days to get back to the main camp. If the team lost the scroll to stealth attacks, they could still get a few points by returning a second, smaller scroll that could not be taken during the first 2 days. Naruto's group, Mitsune, Hattori, and himself, were assigned to go after Satsuko, Kenji, and Kuga. Kuga was the strongest taijutsu fighter in the class. Kenji was sharp with trap detection and solid in combat. Satsuko, their leader, was a long-range specialist with kunai and shuriken. Hattori took lead, and Naruto didn't mind. He was just glad to be included. They split up to locate the enemy team and regroup after a few hours. Naruto found signs of other squads but no trace of Satsuko. Mitsune had the same luck. But Hattori found them. He sent Naruto back to scout the traps without being spotted. When Naruto returned, he mapped the enemy camp's layout, and Hattori began plotting the attack. Most teams expected ambushes at night. It was easy to hide in the dark. Hattori decided to hit just before dawn, using low light and heavy tree cover to their advantage. The traps were clever, but Naruto knew how to slip past them. Hattori let him lead. They moved in half an hour before sunrise. Kenji was on watch, but looked bored and tired. Mitsune was quick-footed and quiet, and when the sun began to rise, she slipped into camp. If anyone got caught, the team would have to turn around and try again. No fighting was allowed until the 3rd day. Unfortunately, Satsuko had kept the main scroll. Mitsune had gotten past the perimeter, but the team leader spotted her. Without giving up her teammates, Mitsune surrendered and let Kenji escort her out of camp. Kuga and Satsuko were on high alert for Naruto and Hattori, but both stayed in cover, waiting until their opponents let their guard down. That moment came sooner than expected. Hattori made his move next. Since Mitsune had already seen Satsuko with the scroll, they'd switched it to Kuga, who hid it in his back kunai pouch. When Kuga stepped away to use the bathroom, Hattori used a transformation jutsu to disguise himself as Satsuko and intercepted him outside the camp. She asked for the scroll back, saying Kenji had spotted enemy scouts and she needed to reposition it. Since the team thought only Kuga had left, they wouldn't suspect a mid-shift swap. Hattori sealed the trick by claiming Satsuko had used a clone to maintain appearances inside camp. Kuga nodded and handed over the scroll. Satsuko told him to return normally and that she'd sneak back in when Kenji gave the all-clear. The disguise worked perfectly, and Naruto led Hattori out of trap range without a hitch. Mitsune met them in the woods and celebrated the success. They spent the rest of the day refining ambush tactics and surveillance strategies. Since they didn't know what route Satsuko's team would take, elaborate traps weren't an option. Naruto offered some quick deploy setups while Hattori and Mitsune tracked the enemy's movements. Once Mitsune got a read on their path, she'd relay it to Naruto, then help with trap placement while Hattori flanked from behind. The goal wasn't harm, it was clean capture. Their weapons were dulled, and knockouts weren't guaranteed unless they hit a lucky spot. Naruto suggested a series of net traps and tripwires for easier containment, and Hattori agreed. They practiced taijutsu through the afternoon and rested until sundown. If Satsuko figured out that scroll teams could technically leave the designated camping area as soon as it hit midnight, she'd probably take advantage. She had been smart enough to relocate the camp after Kuga's mistake. Naruto's team spent a bit of time scouting the new area. But Satsuko was not smart enough to anticipate the midnight rule. That worked in Naruto's favor. He had plenty of time to set some traps along a likely interception path. Mistune and Hattori stayed behind to watch the camp. The opposing team didn't head out until late morning. Mitsune regrouped with Naruto to let him know they were circling east. She helped Naruto finish the more likely trap zone, and the two waited for Hattori to rejoin them. An hour later, they had visual. Kuga led, flanked by Satsuko and Kenji in a triangle formation. Naruto rolled his eyes. Kuga watched the front. The others scanned the sides. But none of them were watching their rear. Kenji spotted some traps and tried to maneuver around them. That left Kuga stepping right. A few Kenji missed. Once Hattori and Mitsune launched their attack, Naruto rushed ahead to place netting and trip wires. They worked great together. Satsuko ran out of projectiles and was snagged in a net quickly. Kuga charged Hattori in fury but tripped over a wire, giving Hattori just enough time to strike and knock him out. With his team down, Kenji was easy to take down. Naruto led the still awake and tied up Satsuko back by kunai point as his teammates hauled the other two back to camp. They passed the exercise with flying colors. The next day was theirs to rest before they took the scroll. Kuga complained bitterly about cheating, but Yamato-sensei shut him down. It was a really nice break. Even with the occasional insult from Kuga. With the scroll in hand, Naruto's team set off to defend. They had reviewed their opponents' mistakes during their downtime. Hattori chose a detection-based camp layout. They rotated shifts, 2 on watch, 1 asleep with the scroll. To prevent infiltration by Henge, they set up a basic hand sign protocol to confirm identity. And instead of hiding the scroll, they left it visible. Easier for enemies to spot, but also easier to keep track of. Satsuko's team had failed when they lost sight of it. Attempts came. None succeeded. On the second night, He broke camp at midnight and sprinted toward the main site. By switching to tree routes, they hoped to cut their arrival time to half an hour. Naruto kept up easily, treating it like roof hopping with smaller landing zones. They reached the camp without incident. Only one Chunin instructor was awake. When he saw Naruto, his eyes sharpened with hatred. Naruto didn't react. He was used to it. But his teammates clearly weren't. "Did we do something wrong, sensei?" Hattori asked, glancing between Naruto and the teacher. "No," the man replied flatly. "Most teams don't think to return this early. Yamato-sensei is asleep. But wake him and report in." Naruto stayed quiet as Hattori and Mitsune exchanged uncertain looks. They gave a polite thank you and headed off. "I wonder what that was about," Hattori muttered. "Did you prank him recently?" Naruto shook his head. Mitsune didn't press the question. They found Yamato-sensei and woke him without trouble. He was surprised but not upset. He told them to inform their opponents as well. He led them to Satsuko's team and delivered the news. Kuga exploded. "What? It's not even dawn. How can they be back already? The rules say you can't return until the third day begins." Yamato-sensei explained. "That happened at midnight. If you run, the distance takes just over 30 minutes. The stunned reactions made him soften a bit. "Don't feel bad. Only a few teams think about that detail. You're not the first to miss it." Satsuko and Kenji took the loss gracefully, if begrudgingly. Kuga, though, directed his frustration squarely at Naruto, glaring at him like he was the reason they'd lost. Hattori and Mitsune didn't get the same treatment. Naruto shrugged it off like he always did. He followed his teammates to an open spot and laid out his sleeping bag. They still had 2 days left at camp and they were all tired from running. To be continued, and thank you for watching.